Have you ever felt overwhelmed by the weight of choices, the pull of temptation, or the fear of drifting from your purpose? You're not alone. Solomon had it all: wisdom, wealth, and 1,000 women. But at what cost? Behind the pure gold and sacred rituals hid secrets of seduction, betrayal, and spiritual decline that changed Israel forever. Few know the full story. Today, you're about to see it unfold like never before. Solomon's temple wasn't just a building, it was a declaration. Crafted over 7 tireless years by more than 180,000 workers, it stood like a golden crown on Mount Moriah. Every inch radiated majesty, walls paneled with cedar from Lebanon, overlaid with pure gold, and adorned with carved cherubim that seemed almost alive in the flicker of oil lamps. This was no ordinary structure. It was a symbol of divine presence, a masterpiece of Phoenician architecture, and the spiritual heart of Israel. As the people gazed upon it, they didn't just see a building. They saw hope, reverence, and mystery. And yet, the magnificence came at a cost, literally and spiritually. The royal treasure was drained to fund its sacred extravagance, and forced labor from the tribes of Israel fueled its construction. Taxes soared, and murmuring rose among the people. Still, the temple was a sight to behold. The Holy of Holies held the Ark of the Covenant, only entered once a year by the high priest. The aroma of daily sacrifices filled the air as Levites orchestrated a heavenly symphony of worship. Every brick told a story of sacrifice, governance, and devotion. Solomon's wisdom, famed across nations, was nowhere more evident than in the temple's detailed planning. The structure aligned with the cycles of the sun, reflected Hebrew legends, and upheld ancient traditions passed through oral teachings. The priestly divisions ensured that worship never ceased. 24 courses of priests kept the rituals alive, while sacred baths prepared them for service. From sunrise to sunset, Israel's heartbeat pulsed through the chants and sacred music flowing from the inner courts. But behind the solemn faces of the priests and the flickering candlelight in the holy chambers, whispers began to circulate about the king's growing fascination with foreign customs, and the shadow of foreign gods creeping through the gates of Jerusalem. The grandeur of the temple masked an inner vulnerability, a slow drift from undivided devotion. As political power increased, so did spiritual compromise. The same hands that lifted incense to Yahweh would soon erect altars to Baal. Even as the temple drew kings and queens from afar, it became a place of both worship and warning. Solomon's mysteries ran deep. Was this temple built solely for Yahweh, or had his heart already begun to divide? Daily sacrifices continued. The Levites sang their psalms, but not all was as it seemed. The cedars of Lebanon whispered in the wind, as if carrying secrets of coming changes, subtle but inevitable. And so, while the sacred temple stood firm on the outside, the story unfolding within the palace walls was becoming more tangled. For just beyond the sanctuary, a realm equally complex was rising, a place not of gold and stone, but of silk, seduction, and silent rivalries. Welcome to Solomon's Harem. Have you ever felt lost, disconnected from who you truly are, unsure of God's plan for your life? The truth is, you are not here by chance. God has a purpose for you, and I want to help you discover it. That's why I created 3 ebooks that will transform your journey with God. Click the link in the pinned comment and start your transformation now. Beyond the golden halls of Solomon's temple lay another kingdom, one made not of carved cherubim or cedars of Lebanon, but of perfume-laced chambers, luxurious garments, and the soft murmurs of hundreds of women. Solomon's harem wasn't merely a collection of lovers. It was a complex political organism. With 700 royal wives and 300 concubines, each alliance sealed a treaty, forged peace, or expanded the kingdom's influence. These women, many from foreign lands, brought with them not just exotic beauty, but also the gods, customs, and culture of their people. Life within the harem was a labyrinth of hierarchy and intrigue. The competition for Solomon's attention wasn't just romantic, it was strategic. A single night with the king could mean elevation in status for a woman and a future throne for her child. Behind every silk curtain, whispers of succession echoed. Who would bear the next prince? Who would rise and who would fade into the shadows? Harem life was quiet, yet thunderously political, a silent battlefield of seduction and ambition. The daily rituals were nothing short of sacred. Before seeing the king, the women were prepared in sacred baths, massaged with exotic perfumes, and robed in garments woven with care. These were not just traditions, they were rituals of seduction, reflecting the opulence of Solomon's court. Every sense was engaged. Fragrance, touch, music, and movement. The harem was less a prison and more a stage, where charm, wisdom, and subtle power ruled. But within this sensuous world, danger loomed. Foreign influence crept in through whispered prayers to foreign gods, through songs in strange tongues sung in twilight. Solomon, once a paragon of Hebrew devotion, began to indulge not only in the beauty of his wives, but also in their beliefs. What began as strategic alliances gradually turned into spiritual compromises. And with each altar erected to a foreign deity, the soul of Israel grew more divided. The tension inside the palace walls mirrored the strain outside. The tribes of Israel saw their king becoming something different. The spiritual compass was shifting, ever so slightly but dangerously. Yet within the palace, the music and dance continued, oblivious or perhaps willfully ignorant of the murmuring beyond the walls. Every evening, as the Song of Songs echoed gently through the corridors, a new chapter of seduction unfolded, and a deeper question lingered. Who truly held the power? And as the perfumes rose and the golden lamps flickered, one could almost hear the unspoken truth, that in the heart of the king, something was changing. The women in Solomon's harem weren't just companions. They were keys to deeper mysteries, unfolding with each tender glance and whispered word. And from those mysteries would come the next ritual, a ritual not of state but of intimacy and power. Every evening in Solomon's palace was draped in mystique. As the golden sun dipped behind the hills of Jerusalem, the air changed. Incense curled through the halls, and the sound of soft strings stirred the air. This was the hour when the rituals of seduction began. The women, chosen from among nations, underwent sacred preparation, bathed in perfumed oils, adorned with exotic fabrics, their skin glistening with balms brought from far lands. It wasn't mere vanity. It was ceremony. It was power cloaked in silk. These rituals weren't random. They followed traditions that echoed across kingdoms and cultures. Sacred baths symbolized purification, while luxurious garments represented readiness to enter the presence of royalty. It's fascinating how deeply spiritual even intimacy was in Solomon's world. As strange as it seems, these moments mirrored the temple's own routines of sanctification. One prepared to enter the holy place, the other, the king's chambers. Both demanded reverence. And what of Solomon? He too participated, though not with oils or garments, but with words. His wisdom turned to poetry, his charm into melody. The Song of Songs, that mysterious and passionate scroll of scripture, wasn't just theology. It was an echo of these encounters. "Your love is more delightful than wine," he would whisper. And for a moment, a woman became queen. These weren't merely romantic verses, they were spells of longing, couched in sacred language, unlocking doors to something deeper. But these encounters weren't only about flesh. They held within them spiritual consequence. Many of these women came from lands steeped in the worship of foreign gods. In their touch, they brought their altars. In their eyes, foreign spirits lingered. The bedchamber became an altar of its own, where the flame of desire intertwined with the smoldering embers of compromise. Seduction wasn't only carnal, it was spiritual, and it was contagious. It's here that the invisible battle grew fiercest. Israel's shepherd king, once filled with divine wisdom and zeal, began to falter in these quiet hours. The very rituals that crowned his nights now chipped away at his soul. A kiss became a covenant, a perfume, an invitation to foreign influence. And slowly his heart, once aligned with God, tilted like a tower built on shifting sand. All this while the palace whispered and watched, and as the moon lit the columns of the inner court, another night fell. The music would return. The dancers would sway, the sacred baths would be drawn again. But beyond the beauty, deeper shadows grew. Whispers of magic, murmurs of demons, and the legend of a certain ring would soon arise. In Solomon's palace, the night didn't simply fall. It arrived like a guest of honor, welcomed with music and mystery. The air shimmered with melodies from lyres, flutes, and harps, as dancers moved like whispers through the royal courts. These were no ordinary performances. They were carefully choreographed expressions of desire, devotion, and sometimes secrets too deep to speak aloud. Every note in the Song of Songs breathed life into the evening, turning the palace into a theater of both beauty and enchantment. It wasn't just entertainment, it was atmosphere. Music had purpose. In Hebrew culture, sound had power. It could soothe a tormented spirit, as David once did for Saul, or it could awaken hidden desires, as it did in the heart of the king. Solomon's musicians were no mere artists, they were spiritual artisans, crafting emotion with rhythm and magic with melody. Some believed their harmonies tapped into heavenly symphonies. Others whispered they stirred darker things. There were stories, ancient whispers passed in trembling tones, that Solomon possessed a magical ring. One said to control demons, to reveal the unseen. That this ring wasn't just myth, but a tool he used in both governance and construction of the temple. Some claimed it helped him command the spirits beneath the earth to gather materials, to lift stones too heavy for mortal hands. Whether truth or legend, its tale added to the mystical aura surrounding the king. And so, night after night, the palace became more than a royal residence. It became a sanctuary of ancient mysteries. Perfumed air mixed with sacred chants, and dancers moved as though possessed by celestial rhythms. The line between the holy and the profane blurred. Guests from foreign lands, kings, queens, merchants, were enchanted by the sight. But among the flickering lamps and floating silks, even they sensed something deeper pulsing beneath the elegance. It was in this enchanted atmosphere that decisions were made, alliances were formed, and secrets exchanged in the cadence of a melody. The music didn't just entertain, it disarmed. It soothed the weary and seduced the wise. And as it echoed through the golden halls, it masked the shifting tides of Solomon's heart, a heart once grounded in God's covenant, now split between sacred law and seductive song. And what of the ring? What of the demons and angels it was said to command? The next chapter doesn't come with harmony, it comes with whispers in the dark. For now, the melody fades, but behind the curtain, powers unseen begin to stir. As Solomon's legend grew, so did the rumors, strange ones, whispered not just in Israel, but across distant lands. They said the king wore a ring, not just adorned with jewels, but inscribed with the very name of God. A magical ring, forged not by man, but granted by the heavens, capable of commanding demons and spirits. Some claimed it helped him build the sacred temple, ordering supernatural beings to move stones, cut timber, and reveal secrets buried beneath Mount Moriah. It's hard to separate myth from miracle, but those who walked near him felt something otherworldly. This wasn't the charisma of a mere ruler, it was a divine weight, something beyond natural wisdom. His judgments often pierced the heart, as if he saw more than flesh and words. It's no wonder that ancient texts and Hebrew legends speak of Solomon not just as a king, but as a master of the spiritual realms. A man caught between two worlds, earth and the invisible. There are even stories, spoken in cautious tones, about how he summoned and imprisoned demons, forcing them to serve purposes both sacred and civil. These accounts, preserved in apocryphal texts and oral tradition, describe a king who danced on the edge of holiness and the arcane. He wasn't just a ruler of men, he was a governor of mysteries. Some feared this power, others hungered for it, but none could deny it. Yet, as is often the case with great power, it came with a price. The line between heavenly wisdom and forbidden magic grew thinner by the day. Solomon, once anointed with divine clarity, began exploring the spiritual underworld, not with rebellion, but with curiosity, perhaps a desire to control, to understand, to build more than just structures, to shape destinies. And slowly, that curiosity became compromise. The sacred and the sorceress shook hands. And what of the temple? Built with divine instruction, yes, but what role did the supernatural play in its completion? Was it God alone, or were there forces beyond the light involved? The people wondered. The priests watched. And Solomon, he pressed on, cloaked in robes of glory, bearing a ring of mystery, walking deeper into the unknown. Wisdom, after all, was his gift. But wisdom, unchecked, can become a snare. And so we look again to the temple, not in its construction, but its administration. The fire of ritual must never go out. The priests were not just keepers of order, they were guardians of a spiritual rhythm. A kingdom so powerful needed structure to survive, but structure alone couldn't keep the fire burning. Behind the golden doors of Solomon's temple was a sacred system, meticulous, tireless, and deeply spiritual. The divine fire on the altar wasn't allowed to die, and that required structure. 24 divisions of priests, drawn from the tribe of Levi, served in rotation, ensuring that daily sacrifices, prayers, and offerings were never interrupted. It was a rhythm of reverence, a heavenly symphony composed not of notes, but of incense, chants, and sacred duties. Each priestly division had its role. Some tended the inner courts, others the holy instruments. Some prepared the sacrifices, while others sang the Psalms of David at dawn. The temple wasn't just a place of worship, it was a living organism. Every gesture, every word, every drop of oil had meaning, and this divine structure mirrored the order of heaven. In a world often plunged into chaos, the temple stood as a symbol of holy routine, a constant reminder of God's covenant. But it wasn't just the priests who labored. Levites, singers, gatekeepers, and scribes worked day and night. The temple was the heart of Israel, not just spiritually, but economically and politically. Offerings poured in from every tribe, rituals governed the calendar, and the feasts brought thousands to Jerusalem. It was more than a place of prayer. It was the soul of a nation. The governance of faith, law, and daily life all pulsed from Mount Moriah. And yet, beneath the order, cracks began to form. Foreign influence, brought in through Solomon's marriages and alliances, began to whisper other names, other rituals. As priests lit the lamps and prepared the bread of the presence, some asked quietly, "How long will this balance hold?" Could the temple remain sacred when the heart of the king was turning? Could holy rituals coexist with altars to foreign gods? The tension was subtle, yet tangible. The people still came, still brought their tithes, but questions brewed under the surface. Why did the sacrifices feel routine? Why did the presence of God, once so powerful in the days of the temple's dedication, now seem distant? The structure was still intact, but the spirit, it was flickering like a lamp low on oil. And still the rituals continued, sacred baths, anointed instruments, chants in Hebrew. And just outside, a new pressure grew, for as the machinery of worship pressed on, so too did the cost of it all. Maintaining a temple of gold, a court of opulence, and a kingdom of splendor required more than devotion, it required funding. And that's where the next chapter begins, not in the Holy of Holies, but in the tax collector's hand. A temple gilded in pure gold, a palace filled with exotic perfumes, embroidered linens and sacred instruments, a harem of 1,000 women, each requiring care, housing, and honor. None of this came cheap. To maintain the splendor of Solomon's court and the continuous operations of the temple, the kingdom turned to one of the oldest strategies of power: taxation. And not just simple tithes, but increasingly burdensome levies imposed upon the tribes of Israel. At first, the people gave gladly. After all, their king was wise, his reign was peaceful, and the temple was the dwelling place of God himself. But as years passed, whispers of discontent began to stir. Farmers gave the best of their crops. Shepherds surrendered the choicest of their flocks. Craftsmen labored under quotas and forced levies. And what once felt like holy contribution slowly began to feel like royal extraction. Wealth and power were consolidating in Jerusalem, but the murmuring in the countryside grew louder. The irony is stark. Solomon, the wisest of men, began to lose touch with the wisdom of stewardship. What began as worship evolved into extravagance. Gold shields lined the palace walls, while some families could barely afford grain. The royal treasure overflowed, yet the people's spirits ran dry. The burden of sustaining temple rituals, luxurious garments, and the grandeur of daily court life became too heavy for many to bear. And still the expectations grew. More offerings, more workers, more construction. Sacred festivals demanded even greater contributions, and forced labor crept further into the tribal territories. Men left their homes not just to worship, but to serve royal projects under duress. The cost of Solomon's glory was not just financial, it was emotional, spiritual, generational, and this erosion, though slow, was dangerous. What use is a beautiful kingdom if the people within it are exhausted and bitter? This discontent wasn't just economic, it was spiritual. The Israelites began to question, was this truly what God intended? Had the sacred become too entangled with the secular? Had the line between temple and throne blurred beyond recognition? These were no longer just philosophical questions. They were the beginning of a storm. The unity of Israel was cracking, and the high taxes were the chisel. But as the burden increased, so too did something even more insidious: the quiet rise of spiritual compromise. For just as gold poured into the temple, so did the influence of foreign gods into the king's heart. It didn't happen overnight. Spiritual decline rarely does. It begins with a small shift, a concession here, an altar there. And in Solomon's case, it started with love, or so it seemed. His many foreign wives, symbols of strategic alliances and royal succession, came bearing more than beauty. They came with customs, gods, and spiritual expectations. And Solomon, in his desire to please them, or perhaps in his thirst for knowledge, allowed the sacred boundaries to bend. Altars to Ashtoreth, Chemosh, and Molech began to rise, foreign gods planted on holy soil. Mount of Olives, once kissed by the morning sun as it gazed upon the temple, became shadowed with incense to deities that mocked the God of Israel. The very man who had once prayed, "Lord, give me an understanding heart," now built high places for pagan worship. This wasn't just rebellion, it was seduction of the soul, wrapped in exotic faith and diplomatic desire. And so the temple, majestic and filled with carved cherubim, stood like a lighthouse in a gathering fog. Rituals continued, priests still offered sacrifices, the Levites sang, but something vital had shifted. The God who had filled the sanctuary with cloud at its dedication now watched idols rise on foreign altars. The purity of worship was polluted. Israel's spiritual compass began to spin, no longer pointing north. It's worth pausing here. How often do we, like Solomon, let small compromises enter our own lives in the name of convenience, love, or ambition? A little drift here, a muted conviction there. Before long, our altars are divided. Matthew 6:24 reminds us, no one can serve two masters. Solomon tried, and slowly, it began to erode not just his faith, but the very foundation of Israel's unity. Still, the people followed. Some out of habit, some out of fear, others out of true devotion. But beneath the incense and song, something was breaking. Foreign gods on sacred land? It wasn't just offensive, it was dangerous. The covenant that once bound the people to God was being stretched thin. And with every new temple to a foreign deity, the heavens seemed to grow more silent. And within the palace, even as Solomon's heart drifted, another storm brewed. A battle not between gods but between women. Power struggles erupted, not only between deities, but between the wives and concubines who carried them in their hearts. The harem, once a place of allure, was now a crucible of ambition. Inside the velvet-lined chambers of Solomon's palace, peace was an illusion. Behind jeweled veils and graceful smiles lay ambition sharpened like a dagger. With 700 wives and 300 concubines, Solomon's harem was less a romantic sanctuary and more a battlefield of silent warfare. Each woman wasn't just a consort. She was a representative of a nation, a faith, a royal family, and many had one goal in mind, securing a place of power for her child in the royal succession. In this delicate dance of favor and survival, the rituals of seduction became strategies. A night with the king meant more than pleasure. It could elevate a woman's entire lineage. The harem had its own hierarchy, its own politics. Older wives eyed younger ones with suspicion. Concubines schemed to gain proximity, and attendants carried more secrets than spices. Every whisper carried weight. Every glance, a calculated move in the great game of palace intrigue. And Solomon, the wisest man on earth, was not blind to the currents swirling around him. Yet even his discernment couldn't quell the rising tide of rivalry. He had become both the center of affection and the fuel for competition. The harem, like the temple, had its rituals, only these were less about God and more about power. The women's influence seeped into the court, touching matters of governance, diplomacy, and judgment. Decisions once rooted in divine wisdom now swayed under the subtle pressure of preference. One queen whispered against another. One concubine's son was praised, while another's ambitions were quietly crushed. And in the shadows, conspirators began to emerge. Some wives pushing their sons toward the throne, others allying in secret. This wasn't a house of peace, it was a simmering storm, and the king's heart was at the center of it. But this is what happens when divine order is replaced with human ambition. The sacred becomes political, the personal becomes national, and the palace becomes a battlefield without swords, only soft hands holding hard intentions. Proverbs 14:1 says, "A wise woman builds her house, but with her own hands the foolish one tears hers down." The women of the harem were building and tearing all at once. And when Solomon finally passed, the weight of these rivalries didn't die with him. They passed like an inheritance to the next generation, to his son Rehoboam, who would inherit not just a crown, but a kingdom already on the brink. When Solomon breathed his last, his kingdom stood gilded with glory, but hollowed by discontent. The man who had once been the wisest on earth left behind a legacy as complex as his reign. His achievements were undeniable: the sacred temple atop Mount Moriah, the flourishing of Jerusalem, and a golden age of influence through strategic alliances and displays of wealth and power. But behind the carved cherubim, sacred baths, and daily sacrifices, cracks had long begun to form. Solomon's son, Rehoboam, ascended the throne amidst rising unrest. The tribes of Israel, wearied by decades of forced labor, excessive taxes, and foreign influence, sought a gentler hand. But instead of wisdom, Rehoboam chose pride. Rejecting the seasoned advice of his elders, he boasted he would rule with even greater severity. His words ignited revolt. 10 tribes broke away, forming the northern kingdom, leaving Judah and Benjamin under his control. The United Kingdom, forged under David and Solomon, was now permanently divided. The fall was not just political, it was deeply spiritual. The spiritual decline that had begun with the introduction of foreign gods and altars during Solomon's reign had now taken root in the hearts of the people. What was once a kingdom centered on the worship of Yahweh had become fractured by idolatry and compromise. The temple remained, but the purity of devotion had faded. The rituals continued, but the fire of true faith flickered dimly. Solomon's wisdom, though once praised throughout the known world, had been compromised by personal indulgences and divided loyalties. His vast harem, the luxurious garments, the sacred music, and the rituals of seduction were not merely symbols of opulence. They were reminders of a man who, though richly blessed, allowed his heart to drift from God. As Ecclesiastes echoes, "Vanity of vanities, all is vanity," a statement that may well have been Solomon's own final reflection on a life both exalted and exhausted. His children inherited a kingdom adorned with gold but stained with consequences. Rehoboam, unprepared for leadership, could not sustain the legacy. The sacred temple, once filled with divine glory, would in time be desecrated and destroyed. Solomon's legend lives on in biblical texts and Hebrew culture as both a testament to human potential and a cautionary tale of spiritual decline. In the end, Solomon's life teaches us that no amount of wealth, political power, or strategic alliances can replace obedience to God. Wisdom, though divine, must be guided by faithfulness. And while his buildings crumbled, his story remains, a solemn reminder that even the greatest among us must guard their hearts, lest they forfeit what matters most. Solomon's story isn't just about a king, it's about us, about how even the wisest can fall, and how easily blessings turn into burdens when we drift from God. So, what altars are you building in your heart today? Are they drawing you closer or pulling you away? Let his legacy awaken something in you. Subscribe to walk deeper in the Word, turn on notifications, and join a community hungry for truth and transformation. If Solomon's life was shaped by spiritual forces, what if yours is too? Your birth date may reveal the guardian angel assigned to guide your path, and most people have no idea who's been protecting them all along.